Today's witnesses represent the antidote to the collective action problem we have seen when law firms, universities, and other institutions race to the White House to cut their own deals rather than stand on principle. In this defining moment, our institutions must not grovel before power. They must not retreat. They must stand together. They must lead. Law firms, universities, public servants, Congress, each has a unique role, an important role to play, because a democracy that fails to hold power to account ceases to be a democracy at all.
Today, House and Senate Democrats heard from witnesses who chose to stand against Donald Trump's threats and intimidation. Brian Croswell, who resigned from the Justice Department when he was instructed to dismiss the bribery case against New York City Mayor Eric Adams, said this.
The message that this sent, intentionally or unintentionally, was that public officials may be prosecuted or may be protected from prosecution as long as they're politically aligned with the Trump administration. In a properly functioning justice system, any public official wishing to avoid prison has to live by one rule of thumb: obey our nation's laws. And this action raised an even more chilling question. Is a Justice Department that will drop charges against those who acquiesce to a political demand a Justice Department that will bring charges against those who don't?
Liz Oyer was the Department of Justice pardon attorney before she was fired for refusing to recommend that Mel Gibson's gun rights be restored to him. Liz Oyer testified that Donald Trump's former criminal defense attorney, Todd Blanche, who is now the Deputy Attorney General, planned to send armed U.S. Marshals to her house on Friday night in an apparent attempt to prevent her from testifying today.
I learned that the Deputy Attorney General's office had directed the Department's Security and Emergency Planning Service to send 2 armed Special Deputy U.S. Marshals to my home to serve me with a letter. The letter was to be served at my home between 9 o'clock and 10 o'clock on Friday night. I was in the car with my husband and my parents, who are sitting behind me today, when I got the news that the officers were on their way to my house where my teenage child was home alone. Fortunately, due to the grace of a very decent person who understood how upsetting this would be to my family, I was able to confirm receipt of the letter to an email address, and the deputies were called off. The letter was a warning to me about the risks of testifying here today. But I am here because I will not be bullied into concealing the ongoing corruption and abuse of power at the Department of Justice.
Rachel Cohen resigned from the law firm Skadden Arps after the firm entered into a settlement agreement with Donald Trump that would allow the firm to continue to practice law in Washington, D.C. and not be barred from federal buildings.
I believe our country is teetering on the brink of authoritarianism, and that many leaders of our most prestigious and profitable law firms recognize this risk and choose to ignore it because they are afraid. It's likely they're afraid of losing profits, but I think it's also likely that these leaders are afraid because standing up to authoritarianism is scary. It is easier to ignore what is happening than to acknowledge the fight that lies ahead.
Joining us now is Democratic Senator Adam Schiff of California. Senator, thank you very much for joining us tonight. It is so powerful to be hearing the testimony of these witnesses today. What did you come out of that hearing believing should be next steps?
Well, first of all, Lawrence, we held that hearing. I invited Jamie Raskin to do it jointly with me, along with Senator Dick Durbin, because the Republicans won't do these hearings, because they won't do oversight, because there are really bad and corrupt things happening throughout the administration and in the Justice Department that they're unwilling to put a spotlight on. So we're going to do it for them. And, you know, what was really so impressive to me about these witnesses is they had the guts to come forward. One of the attorneys that you just profiled, Rachel Cohen, she's a third-year associate at a major law firm. She resigns rather than going along with this capitulation to the Trump administration. While you have very successful, much more wealthy and further along in their career lawyers essentially capitulating, she says no. And these other lawyers were either fired at the Justice Department or quit because they wouldn't go along with unethical actions. In the case of Liz Oyer, because she wouldn't approve the restoration of gun rights to a friend of the president, Mel Gibson, she's fired. She's marched out of the building in front of her coworkers. It's just appalling. But I will say this, for those of us that have wondered, what would we do? What would we have done in the McCarthy era? Mm-hmm. Would we have stood up to Joseph McCarthy, a bully like that, or would we have named names? Well, those witnesses that we saw today don't have to ask themselves that question because they stood up and defied these bullies at the Justice Department and in the administration.
That is the question, by the way, in George Clooney's brilliant new play on Broadway, Good Night and Good Luck, in which he is playing in the group of people who decided to stand up against Joe McCarthy. And this really is the moment we're in. And without this hearing today, I don't know that we would have known that the Justice Department was sending U.S. Marshals to one of your witnesses' homes on Friday night to try to stop her testimony today.
Well, that's exactly right. And in fact, it was quite reminiscent, Lawrence, of when we were doing the Ukraine hearings prior to the impeachment of President Trump over his effort to extort Zelensky. Because similarly, the Justice Department, not so thinly veiled, tried to threaten witnesses that came before our committee. Well, they're back at it again. Different cast of characters at the Trump Justice Department Part 2. Frankly, worse set of characters with no limits on what they do, but the same kind of scare tactics, intimidation tactics. You asked at the outset, what do we need to do? And frankly, we need to do a lot more of this. If they're not going to, they being the Republicans, do any kind of oversight, if they're going to essentially be supine for the whole Trump administration, someone is going to have to do this oversight. We're going to do it on the Democratic side of the aisle. When the Republicans wake up and are ready to do their jobs, we will welcome them to the hearings. But until that happens, we're going to bring forward witnesses like this and expose these abuses of the administration.
And Senator, as you continue to do these oversight hearings, we will continue to cover them here on this program. Please feel free to join us whenever you've done them. And Senator Schiff, thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you.